Alrighty, this is about to be my last video because we are going to be done reading. So this is page 104 through 115. It's the last part of the book that you guys are reading. So you're going to get your answers to 1 through 8 for your week 7 questions in this video. And yeah, so first and foremost, right? So they had just gotten off the train or the cattle car, right? Ellie and his dad were 2 of 12 to survive out of the 100. So when they arrived at Buchenwald, the men were able to take showers. Ellie's dad said like he didn't want to live anymore. He had no reason to go on. He was exhausted, and he just wanted to lay down. And Ellie, this goes kind of for number one, he does not let him rest because he says, "Look around, Dad. All these men that are dead are people that wanted to lay down." And now they're dead. So you're not laying down. We're going to go take a shower. And come on, like you're the only reason I'm living right now. So he forces him to keep going. And he's screaming at him, mad at him. He says in that moment that he felt like his dad was more of the child and he's taking care of him because his dad just wanted to give up. So during this time, there's an alert, and so all of the men are told to go to the barracks. And Ellie and his dad get split up here for a little bit. And Ellie wakes up in the morning and he realized that like during the alert he lost his dad and didn't even like notice until he woke up. And for a second, Ellie really contemplates not going to look for his dad. He's kind of like, if I didn't, then I would probably have a better chance of surviving because he's really tired right now. And he feels bad about it immediately after he thinks like, hey, what if I just don't go look for him? So he does go look for him. After hours of looking, he finds him. And his dad did not get any food that night because they told them that the people that were sick were not going to get food because it was a waste because they'd die anyway. So his dad's looking pretty rough. Ellie gives his dad some of his soup, but he actually doesn't even want to give him the soup because he honestly in his head thinks this is a waste because he's going to die soon. And that kind of goes for number two. He kind of compares himself to Rabbi Elihu's son because he's like, there's no reason to give him the soup. He's going to die. He does feel bad about it, and that's why he compares him to his son because he said he never wanted to be like that. But we're sitting here, and his dad's giving up hope, and he's like, hey, why would I give him my soup? He's going to die. But he does give it to him. We know the literally only reason he's alive is because his dad is. So obviously he's still going to fight. He's having a harder time helping him, but he's like, you know what? The only reason I'm here is because my dad is here. So during this time, Ellie's dad literally looks like a ghost. He's so frail and so weak that he kind of looks like a ghost. And Ellie's dad basically starts to tell him where he's hid stuff. He says, hey, I hid all of our valuables under this one spot in our house. Like, that's where you'll find it because he knows that he's basically about to die in this section. Which is kind of rough, right? And Ellie's like, no, but kind of like knows it's coming. He's really weak right now. He's the weakest he's been this whole time. So yeah. Okay, so since Ellie knows his dad's about to die, he trades his ration of bread with somebody. So like he trades his food for the night with someone so that he can lay next to his dad and be with him. And a doctor comes in to try to help his dad, and he decides like there's no point in helping him because he's about to die. And Ellie feels like a serious rage towards him, and he's very angry because his dad, like, he's not helping him, and he realizes like there's nothing that they can do at this point. But Ellie's like, you're a doctor, you're supposed to be helping, and he's very, very angry at this doctor for just like giving up on him. And it's kind of unfortunate, obviously, but we know they're in the camp. Like, just like with the bread, they're not going to waste their resources on people that they know probably don't have a good chance, which is rough and frustrating, obviously. So, with that being said, Ellie mentions that the people in his dad's barracks started to beat him and steal his food, and they were very frustrated with him because his dad was too weak to get up to go to the bathroom, so he's literally going to the bathroom in his bunk, which is nasty because they're all having to deal with that. So they're literally beating this man, stealing his food. He's already down, and they're like kicking him while he's down. And Ellie completely this is like, these people are being so inhumane at this point, but obviously we've seen this throughout the entire book. As they're getting closer and closer to feeling weaker and weaker, they're caring less and less about what other people think. And Ellie's dad keeps kind of asking him for water. That's all he wants. And Ellie is saying, "Hey, I'm your son. Of course I'd give you water." He knows that the water is only going to make him weaker. But at this point, Ellie's kind of like, he's going to die, so I have to give it to him. I feel bad. Uh, for number 5, the advice that the head of the block gives to Ellie, he tells him to stop giving his dad his food. He says, "Hey, you're in here. You're going to live by yourself. You're going to die by yourself. So you giving your dad your food each night is a waste of time, because he's going to die and you're just going to make yourself weaker for no point." Which again is so rough. Like, he kind of knows that's true, but he doesn't want to give up on his dad since they've come so far. He thinks about it for a second, and then he kind of feels guilty for the fact that he thought about it. So it's kind of. With that being said, his dad keeps asking for water, calling Ellie cruel for not giving it to him, because he's like, "If I give you this water, you're going to die quicker. You need food and sustenance in your body." Let me make sure I get all my information for you guys. There's so much that happens in this part. Ellie's dad stays in this like state of dying for about a week. So he's not really living. He's kind of barely holding on for a week. During roll call, let me make sure I get this right. Okay, so Ellie tried to stay with his dad during the roll call for the day, but the guards heard his dad asking him for water, because at this point he's barely alive. He's holding on by a thread, and they beat his dad for asking for water. Again, he's already down. They're kicking him while he's down. It's ridiculous. For number 6, what happens to his dad? On January 29th, 1945, Ellie wakes up and someone new is laying next to him. So his dad died in the middle of the night, and they took him. The night before he dies, Ellie talks about how he sat there and stared at him for hours. And I think that he really thinks he knows that he's about to die. So he sat there and stared at him for a very long time, just kind of taking in the fact that they've made it this far. But he did wake up to somebody new. So his dad passed away in the middle of the night. Ellie said that he didn't even cry. He said he felt relieved and kind of free of the stress and pain of having to try to keep his dad alive. Because honestly, for the last few weeks, he'd really been holding his dad on his back, trying to get him to live. Which again shows how unfortunate it is. He's kind of lost his sense of like meaning and holding on to that hope that his dad would be alive. Ellie was in Buchenwald, the last camp they're in, until April 11th. So he survived for 4 more months without his dad. And he says in that time in the book, this is really vague, there's not a lot written for this part, because he said he didn't feel like writing about it. He had nothing to write about for those 4 months. His dad wasn't there. He felt numb. He didn't think about his mom. He didn't think about his dad. He didn't think about his sister. The only thing he said he thought about in that time was food. He didn't care about anything else but the food he was going to get for the day, because he was so starving and so weak. So Ellie was ended up moving to the children's block with 600 other kids. And on April 5th, I'm trying to get all my dates right for you, all the Jewish people were called to the assembly place, and Ellie thought that they were honestly about to all die, just because they were so weak. So someone told them to go back to their block, and they did. And the camp was about to be evacuated. Buchenwald was going to be evacuated because the Allied forces were really near, and they knew. So we know that the Nazis just wanted to keep them under their control. So they were about to move them again, because they knew that it was about to be taken over by the Allied forces. So on April 10th, 1945, this is for number 8 here, our last question, the American troops liberated Buchenwald, and the Jews were set free. Ellie says that the SS was trying to obviously evacuate the camp. He said that the fight between the Americans and the SS guards did not last very long, and the children tried to stay on the ground to stay safe. But the men were liberated. He said that nobody cared once all the Jewish people were liberated from that Buchenwald camp, so Ellie was freed. We do know this because he wrote the book, right? He had just made it. He said that in those days that they were let out, not a single one of them cared about revenge. They didn't care about getting back at the Nazis. All they cared about was food. Like, they were so weak that all they cared about in that time was food and just getting nutrition in their body. This part's really crazy to me. 3 days after being freed, Ellie actually got food poisoning. You could kind of assume if you haven't eaten a lot of food for a long time and you eat a ton at once, you get really sick usually. So he literally got food poisoning and he spent 2 weeks in a hospital, and he actually almost died in those 2 weeks because he was so sick, which is crazy because you're like, you survived this entire experience in these concentration camps and you almost die in a hospital later. That would have just not served any justice for this at all. But he does end up living. He ends the book by talking about how when he was in the hospital, he looks at himself in the mirror for the first time since his family left the ghetto. And he says the look in his eyes as he looked at himself was something that he'll absolutely never forget, because he literally didn't even know what he looked like at that point. And he kind of just looked like a stranger because he was so weak and frail and tiny from barely getting fed in the concentration camps. And that's how he leaves the book. So he ends up living. We know that because he wrote the book. Unfortunately, his dad didn't. He lived 4 months without him in the camps. I don't know how he survived that whole time, but I think, like he said, he was so numb he didn't even think about anything in that time, but just eating. But he lived, and he actually ended up dying. I think a few years ago he passed away, so he lived to be fairly old. But yeah, so that's what we have. That's our book.